Oi! Bloody pilgrims. This video is brought to you by Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. More about that later on. But first, an acknowledgement. After part 2 of this video series, my Camino Week by Week, I got a comment from Chuck. As far as I'm aware, Chuck is the only person who's met me in real life and who watches these videos on YouTube. And Chuck was very complimentary about my philosophical insight that on the Camino you never say goodbye to people because you might see them again in 2 minutes or 2 days or never again. When I read Chuck's comment, I remembered it was Chuck's idea, so I'm more than happy to acknowledge it was Chuck's idea and that it is a very good idea, very good philosophical insight. This is what Chuck looks like. I haven't drawn a joke nose on him, that's just what he looks like in real life. So, back to part 3, the story so far. I'm a week into the Camino, I'm at Logroño, and we're all starting to become more pilgrims rather than tourists, so we're all experts at checking into an albergue. We can easily walk 10 kilometres before breakfast without thinking about it, and for the first time we all say buen camino to each other regularly. I've been walking with someone for the previous week. It's turning into a bit more of a holiday, so rather than carry on like that, which should be very easy, I decided to start walking further each day and to walk by myself because I thought that would be a bit more of an adventure. The camera's becoming a bit of a nuisance. It comes out much less often, and in fact there isn't that much to record. Day 8, farmland in villages. Day 9, farmland in villages. Day 10, farmland villages and a hill. Here's a photograph of the hill. Important topics of conversation like how much does your rucksack weigh has become very boring. Keeping up with your Camino friends is less important. So in this episode there are no exciting sea voyages, no trips across Spain in a coach. The holiday is over now and the pilgrimage begins. So day 8, I stayed at the Municipal Donativo at Nájera. The volunteers there are the most helpful and most kind anywhere I met along the Camino. They welcome you with food and water, which is great after walking so far. They give you a VIP tour of the albergue and they stay up with you in the evening. When I was cooking my pasta, one of the volunteers went to get me a stool so I could sit down and rest my legs. You cannot fault them at all. The albergue is quite crowded, there's lots of beds there, and also there's lots of young people, and young people, they're very well behaved, they're not drunk or anything like that, but they're very sociable, very confident, and in my mind they seem very cool. There's lots of them there socialising, and there's young men and young women socialising together. The dynamic is all wrong for a 50-year-old man to go and join in, although I'm sure that I could have gone and spoken to them if I wanted to, and they would have spoken to me quite happily. So in the bunk under me was a 70-year-old Irishman who was cycling the Camino, and we both looked at each other and thought, what on earth have we let ourselves in for? And we sort of cheered ourselves up a bit, laughing at the predicament we'd managed to get ourselves into. We were both tired and a bit fed up. The next morning you get woken up at 6 o'clock in the morning and off you go into the world again. I think to understand the Camino you have to understand the types of people that do it, and I think you can put them into quite specific groups. So for example, young people, they're very sociable, but they haven't got that much money, so they tend to end up in the bigger municipal albergues where there are kitchens and there are larger rooms where you can socialise. The one thing that makes them stand out from the other pilgrims is they have very little money. So for example, one young man told me he hadn't been able to go to the cathedral in Burgos because he didn't have enough money to pay. We didn't feel he could spend the money to go in. And another time I was walking with a young man and I paid for him to stay in the albergue, and he was quite grateful about that. The next group of people are what I think of as the adventurous mums. They might not be mums, but they're women in their 50s and above, and they all have loved ones at home and they're desperate to keep in touch with them. So whenever you see them, they're either on the way to making a phone call or Skyping home, or on the way back from having made the phone call. They like to talk, and that's an important part of their Camino, meeting people and also the places they visit along the way. So one woman, for example, wanted to stay at an albergue because they did yoga there, and then she's seen another one that had a vegan meal, so that was her Camino all planned out. Another woman, she started walking the Camino in Pamplona, but she hadn't felt confident enough to stay in an albergue until after Burgos. So for her, staying in an albergue was quite an adventure. They don't seem to walk so many miles or kilometres a day as other people. They're marching men. They're men in their 50s and above, and for them the physical challenge of walking the Camino is important, and also just that time to be alone, the solitude, to get away from their families or their jobs, or just to have some time to themselves. They're quite sociable. More often than not, they're family men, and they're quite happy to talk to you about themselves and their families. But you can just tell they're always quite keen to get back to the important business of walking. Apart from the walking men, there is quite a significant number of men who are just tired. One man said he did have a phone, but it was a very simple phone. You could only use it either to make phone calls or to send and receive text messages, and he just switched it on once or twice a week to check for messages from his wife in case there'd been an emergency at home. But apart from that, you could just tell he was tired and he wanted to rest from his job and his family, and he said in the afternoons he was writing, and that was what he wanted to do. Another man I met, he was a family doctor, and all of his patients in the town we lived loved him, but it meant when he went on Facebook, for example, he had to go on Facebook in an assumed name so that his patients couldn't find him. And when he was walking the Camino, he had to have a new SIM card so his patients couldn't phone him up. So these are just men in their 50s. They just want a rest. The next group of people are couples. If you walk with somebody else, then your Camino is completely different. And if you're in a relationship with that person, then I can see that's a good thing to do, to spend time with each other. But it makes you stand out from the other pilgrims because they tend to keep themselves to themselves much more. For example, one night I was in a bar. Well, it's part of an albergue, but it's the bar associated with the albergue at the set time for the communal meal, and there was only 3 of us in there, and the couple would rather watch me eat on my own than invite me over. So there are people in their 30s and 40s that do the Camino. They tend to be the people who are between jobs, or maybe even got fed up of one career and given up and want to change, and they do the Camino as a bridge between their next life. They're professional people, as in fact all people on the Camino. They tend to be educated, professional, middle-class people, I think. It's become a bit of a cliche, but the Camino is thought of as a place where if you have terrible troubles in your life, you can go and walk the Camino and try and sort yourself out. You do see quite often people are carrying photographs of loved ones that I think they must have lost, and as a sort of, they're doing the Camino as a memorial. One man told me he'd been very ill the year before, and he promised God if he got better he would walk the Camino, which he was doing. And a woman told me she'd lost a child. But apart from that, I think all pilgrims are just ordinary people, which means they all have troubles in their lives, and by the time you get to 50 or so, you can be quite sure everyone's suffered real sorrow. So people who might go on the Camino because they have troubles, or people go on the Camino because there's ordinary people, they're quite similar. Recently, the BBC broadcast a series of programmes about walking the Camino, and you can tell the person sitting at home in London had certain expectations about the sort of people who do it. So, for example, they had 7 celebrities, And each celebrity was chosen for a specific reason. Some were religious, some weren't. Some had suffered quite badly in the past. One woman was recently widowed. Another man had been imprisoned for life for a crime he hadn't committed. And then during the course of the programmes, they got, the religious people and the non-religious people to talk to each other in quite a civilised way about does God exist and those sorts of things. But no matter how civilised you try to discuss things like the existence of God, it always turns into a bit of a competition because each person wants to try and win their argument. So those sorts of discussions, at least in my experience, do not happen at all, because those sorts of discussions divide people, don't they? One person believes in God, another person doesn't. On the Camino, everything's much more inclusive. Everyone's made to feel welcome, everyone's equal. For their Camino programme, the BBC interviewed John, who wrote the guidebook. He's a real person. He's walked the Camino over 50 times. I don't know if he was an architect or had a similar job, and he decided his life had no meaning, so he walked the Camino, and I think quite a number of other people must do the same. But I think in the same way that to walk the Camino you need a basic level of physical fitness, you also need a basic level of mental fitness. If you really are struggling, the Camino might not be the best thing to do. Here's what Seneca has to say about it. Are you surprised that after such long travel and so many changes of scene, you have not been able to shake off the gloom and heaviness of your mind? You need a change of soul rather than a change of climate. Your faults will follow you wherever you travel. As Socrates said, why do you question that wandering does not help you, seeing that you always take yourself with you? The reason which sets you wandering is always at your heels. You must lay aside the burdens of your mind. Until you do this, no place will satisfy you. You wander here and there to rid yourself of the burden that rests upon you, but it will become more troublesome by reason of your very restlessness. Just as when in a ship the cargo shifts and makes the ship uncontrollable, anything you do works against you, and you hurt yourself by your very unrest, for you are shaking up a sick man. Trouble once removed, all changes of scene will become pleasant. As it is, however, you are not journeying, you are drifting, and being driven only exchanging one place for another, although that which you seek is found everywhere. Accepting your sins rather than travel is the first step to salvation, for someone who does not know they have sinned does not desire correction. So, Seneca. Day 9 is Granion. It's another Donativo. They're very friendly volunteers again. The 3 things they do at Granion, which is different to other albergues. Number 1 is as a church service you're all welcome to, and although I think you'd be welcome at any church service along the Camino, it seems to be especially associated with the albergue. I went along, the locals there are very welcoming. The priest at one time invited all the pilgrims to go up to the front of the church and stand by him, and he said something. Now, none of us pilgrims really spoke that much Spanish, so we didn't understand the service at all. but there was just a nice, nice welcome to have. And after my day the night before with all the young people, it was nice to be welcomed. And this is something to understand from the Camino, that although it might have a religious aspect to it, nobody tries to make you into a Christian. It's everyone together and everyone's welcome, which I think is good. The second thing they do at Granion, which I didn't see at any other albergue, is you go back later on in the evening into the church and all the lights are off except for the lights on the altar, and you're encouraged to share your experiences so far and any spiritual revelations you've had and anything personal. We weren't very good at that. It was all a bit awkward. I suppose we're only 8 days in, so we all like me, everyone there wanted to know more about the Camino and the Camino experience and the spiritual revelations, but we hadn't actually had any ourselves, so we were all hoping for somebody else to speak out. 1 or 2 people said some things, but I feel we let the side down. And if you think in real life, you're not really encouraged to talk about those sorts of things, so we didn't know how to say it and we didn't have the right vocabulary. So I think even if people did have some things they could have said, no one felt able to. At that reflections session, 3 pilgrims played musical instruments and it was absolutely beautiful. And of course, as soon as they started playing, and in fact we'd seen them practicing in the albergue before, so as soon as we saw them practicing, everyone got their cameras out, because you could just tell everyone was desperate to have something special to take home with them to show their friends and family that they'd had a Camino experience. Some people thought this would look good on my YouTube channel, because we were all desperate for something new, something different to just walking in the daytime and then staying in an albergue in the evening. At Granion there's a communal meal and the pilgrims help to prepare it, and we all do the washing up afterwards. Also, Granion has a very special stamp they put in your credential, so look out for that. And all the other albergue owners I stayed after that, they all recognise Granion's special stamp. Whenever I said to someone later on in the Camino, how has your Camino been, what's your favourite aspects, quite often people would mention staying at Granion and the experience they'd had there. So that's a thumbs up for Granion. I didn't sleep very well there. It's very cramped. It was quite hot. I had a bit of a stuffy nose. Up you get the next day and off you go. After part 2 of this video series, my Camino week by week, somebody pointed out to me that although lots of people might be wearing boots still at Rompesvalles, because that's only after the first day's walking, after a couple of days everyone realises it's impossible to walk the Camino with boots, and everyone throws their boots away and buys shoes. Well, so when I was at Granion, I took a photograph of the boot room there, and there were 13 boots, 8 pairs of shoes and no sandals. So people were still walking in boots and they were walking fine. So I think that'll be my last word on boots and shoes. So day 10, I stayed at an albergue I'm not going to name. I will show you a video of it because it was absolutely filthy. The albergue owner was very friendly. It was associated with a bar, and we went. There were 4 pilgrims staying in there. I didn't see the 4th one, but the other 2, who were a young couple walking together, and we went to the bar and we had a nice meal there. It's the first time I'd spoken to young people at any length of time in the Camino, and what seemed the first week at least, young people full of energy, partying, a bit intimidating. Groups of people are a bit intimidating, aren't they? When you meet 2 young people together, by that stage of the Camino, they were tired, fed up. In fact, I was tired and fed up. So when I spoke to them, they said they were a bit fed up of the holiday atmosphere of the first week, and just like I'd walked a bit further to get away from my old Camino friends, they were doing the same. And when I had the communal meal at Granion, it's quite a big affair, benches and lots of people sitting together. So I had 1 person either side of me and 3 people in front of me that I could have spoken to. There's lots of people either side of them. It's quite difficult to have a conversation like that, even though everyone spoke good English at that meal in Granion. This time, with just us 3, we were tired. We didn't have a particularly great conversation, But it was just nice to be with someone, and we could tell we were tired. A bit like when I was with the Irishman. It was just, meeting your fellow pilgrim and being together. This was much more comforting than having some great philosophical conversation with your fellow pilgrims. Day 11. I'm going to call this day Disaster Day because after going past the archaeological site at Atapuerco, there's a village, and there's a sign in the village that says Camino de Santiago, left, and there's a left arrow, at 200 metres. Well, I now understand and now realise that sign means carry on walking along the road you're on at the moment, and when after 200 metres, turn left, and that's where the Camino will be. At the time I thought, because it said left, I thought it meant turn left now, and there was a road there, and then at 200 metres that's where the Camino will be. So I walked up this road, and within about 10 minutes I'd realised I'd gone the wrong way. But rather than just spend 10 minutes walking back again, I thought, well, I can see the rough direction I want to go, and there's a bit of farmland, so I'm sure no one will mind if I just sort of cut across the fields and keep going. And also, after a week of walking the Camino and following the yellow arrows, this was quite an exciting adventure. So I set off. I couldn't always go where I wanted to because the ground was a bit rough in places, and there was scrubland and things like that, and gorse bushes. So anyway, after an hour, I was back to where I started off from. So I thought, shall I just spend 10 minutes going back to the Camino and I'll know where I am and everything will be sorted out, or shall I have another go? And this time I thought, well, I know where the sun is, so if I keep the sun in roughly the same position in the sky all the time, I know I'm going in a straight line. So I decided to have another go at cutting across the country. This time it's more successful. I went in a straight line and made better progress. And then I came to this sign, and it said something like Vehículos de Cadenas. In Spanish, cadena is a chain. So I thought, vehicles that have chains, that must be bicycles. So I thought, well, this is very good, a bicycling area in the middle of Spain, in the middle of nowhere. So I carried on going straight, and I came in the scrubland. I came to this quite a wide track, which is much easier to walk on, although it wasn't going exactly the way I wanted it to go. And I walked along there for a bit, and then I noticed there's quite the ground had been gorged out by some quite big vehicle, and it was much wider than an ordinary car. And I thought, I wonder if vehicles with chains, vehículos de cadenas, I wonder if that means tanks. And so I left that area quite quickly. Instead of going ahead to try and meet the Camino somewhere ahead, I took a sharp right and just found it wherever it was down there. So you might think being at danger of being squashed to death by a tank was the disaster. That wasn't the disaster at all. That's fine. What was the disaster is, by the time I got to the albergue that night, I think I'd walked over 40 kilometres. Now at that time, if I'd walked 30 kilometres, my feet would tell me to stop. So 40 kilometres, my feet really hurt, the soles were very tender. I could almost feel the bones of my feet were bruised. I ran out of water. I had to eat an orange, which I had with me, to keep going. And I staggered into the albergue. I was so glad to get there. And it was an albergue of a bar, so you could eat straight away. And I ate the evening meal as well. It's the only day I got heat rash, not because it was so hot, but just because my boots had been on for so long. And that when you bruise your feet like that, it's not a case of just going to sleep and then waking up better the next day. For the next 2 days, my feet were quite sore. I found the junction where I got lost on Google Maps. Here's the Google Street View image for 2013. it looks as though the sign is quite a new addition and it wasn't there then, so I've drawn it in. But if you look on the right hand side of the image, there's the original sign, which is also pointing left. So it looks like they know there was a problem, that there was a sign pointing left and misleading people, and they've tried to fix it by adding another sign that points left. That night, everyone at the evening meal seemed to be Italian, and I never really worked out how some albergues attracted one group of people rather than another, but there it is. So the next day I got up and I was very close to Burgos by that time. So by 11 o'clock in the morning or 12 midday I was there. I have cycled through Burgos before, and I remember it as being quite a small town with a nice cathedral. But when you're walking, especially when you're walking with sore feet, it seems enormous. And I stopped off at a supermarket on the way in, and after being on the Camino, a real big supermarket, this was very exciting. And I filled my rucksack up with food and a little picnic, and I'd booked a hotel with booking.com on my phone, and it was €35 for a single room and an ensuite bathroom, and I had my own electrical socket where I could plug things in without having to worry about anyone else, and a little shelf where I could put my glasses, and a bed with proper sheets and things. Oh, it was a real luxury. And I got into the hotel and I ate my picnic with cheese and bread and crisps and a really big bottle of Diet Coke. It was a real joy. So that was a great day arriving at the hotel. I had originally planned to stay 2 nights in Burgos, but at that time I still had this real drive to make progress and to keep going, and to spend 2 nights there seemed a waste of a night. Would I have stayed 2 nights again? I don't know, because there's not that much to do in Burgos. There's the cathedral, which is absolutely beautiful, definitely go around the cathedral, and there's also a museum of human evolution, which is very good, very modern, and in fact it's worth going to, because if you ever watch a documentary about human evolution and hominids and all that sort of stuff, 85% of all the human remains that are used by the scientists to put together human evolution all come from that Atapuerca area which you walk past, and you can see the sign. So if you're in Burgos, that's definitely a thing to do. There is a fort on the hill, but with my sore feet I wasn't going to walk up the hill. So after a day, I think that's quite long, and in fact so from 11 o'clock in the morning or from midday until the evening, that was quite long enough to be in Burgos, although I can see having a second or even a third night to rest could be a good thing to do, but I still wanted to push on, so that's what I did. So the next day I came to San Bol, and this is the village where all the albergues get filled up, because everyone sets off from Burgos and walks the same distance and checks in. That night at the albergue, everybody was French. I do not know why. The one part of the day I really enjoyed on the Camino was the afternoons, because you've done all your walking, you've done your washing, you can rest, there's nothing to do, go on your mobile phone, go on the internet. I did enjoy doing that. I drank my Diet Coke. Nearly every albergue has its own Diet Coke machine, which is good, and I'd have bread and cheese with me in my bag, and I'd eat that, and that's such a joy, because the weather was still quite warm at that time. You could sit out in the Camino garden, and in fact all the other times in the Camino it can be quite hard, getting up early, walking, carrying a heavy rucksack, but when you're sat in an albergue garden in the nice weather with your bread and cheese and your Diet Coke, you could in theory be in a 5-star hotel and be having as much enjoyment. The next day I walked to Itero de Bega, and on the way I went past quite a well-known albergue called St. Nicholas, and it's well known because it's in some ancient chapel. There's no electricity, and when you arrive, the volunteers, which is the Donativo, when you arrive, the volunteers wash your feet. And I didn't know this at the time. I walked past it, and there was a sign saying it opens at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I think it was midday when I went past. And I thought I will need to make a bit more progress. I've thought about it a bit more now. Imagine I was on holiday in Las Vegas or in Disney World, and one of the hotels had a ye olde Camino experience. I expect that would be the sort of thing they would do. You know, you'd have glamorous women in sequined outfits washing your feet, and this would all be very exciting. So I wonder if staying in an albergue with no electricity and having your feet washed by the volunteers, I wonder if that's more of a gimmick. Now the thing to say is, I did not stay there, and apart from that I do not know anything else about staying at the albergue, and it's quite possible, if you stay there, it's a great experience and definitely worth doing, like Granion. But this is the internet, and the internet is full of people speaking about things they don't really know. So I wonder if that really is a Camino experience, and if that if staying in an albergue like that isn't the best way to have a sort of a pilgrimage experience. Well, what is? Well, here's my thoughts about the important aspects of pilgrimage. First of all, what something means to people is much more important than what it actually is. So if you're doing it for religious, spiritual, cultural, historic, or in memory of someone else, or you just want a break from your ordinary life, that's the most important part of the Camino, because that's what it means to you. The second aspect, I think, is the solitude aspect. And if you think, quite often when people are working, or you know, they've had a bad day, they get home, they switch the radio on, they switch the television on, they go on Twitter. They don't necessarily want to do those things, but they just want to shut their thoughts out, don't they? They just want to have a break from the day and escape. Well, when you're walking the Camino on your own during the daytime, there is no television or radio, no one to speak to. Your thoughts will come out, and you think them, and you think them all day, and you think them all day for 30 days. So going on the Camino by yourself, it gives you time to think. Being alone with your thoughts sounds very pleasant, but this isn't the Las Vegas Camino. It's not a Hollywood film with a happy ending. You remember things you thought were safely in the past, and think things you thought you would never think again. Still, true love is a rare thing, and few people are worthy of it. And all the time you keep putting one foot in front of the other. In my experience, and my theory, is you do have Camino friends, you know, people that you meet from time to time, and you remember each other's names, you shake hands, and you're miles away from your friends and family, so it's great having someone who knows your name and to say hello to. But because you're walking by yourself, I don't think, in my experience at least, the people you meet, they never become great friends. And you might think, well, why not walk together with someone? You know, you don't have to talk to each other. But if you do that, then after a day or two, it's human nature for teamwork to set up. And that doesn't sound too bad, you know, because teamwork is all about cooperation. But teamwork is also about competition, conflict, and compromise. You know, each person has to cover over their idiosyncrasies out of consideration for the other members of the team. If you're an adventurous mum or a marching man, it's quite possible you've spent your lives bringing up a family, or working in teams, being told what to do, or being in charge of a team and responsible for what other people do. When you go on the Camino, it's probably that one chance in your life, while you're still fit and active, where you are free to do exactly what you want to do. And if you end up in a team, all that suddenly compromise, suddenly you're thinking about other people. But here's some video I made during the second week. Quite a few people are walking together still, so that's obviously an important part to them, to be sociable and to talk to other people. But even though here I am walking on my own, and I'm not walking with them, just because there are people around, it sort of distracts your mind, and you don't feel like you are on your own. So if going on the Camino to have a pilgrimage is important and the solitude aspect is important, I wonder if it's better to choose another of the Camino routes rather than the Camino Frances. And in fact, my friend Geordie, who helped me on some of the videos, he walked the Camino del Norte before Easter in 2018, and he reported it is very quiet. You know, some nights he was in an albergue by himself and he might walk for a day without seeing anyone. So if solitude's important, and I think it probably is, it might be worth considering doing one of the other Caminos. They're probably more difficult to do because the Camino Frances is got lots of albergues, lots of guidebooks, it's all set up for you. But I wonder if there are just too many people on the Camino Frances. The times when I felt closest to people were, for example, at Najera with the Irishman who was cycling the Camino, and the two young people at the Dirty Albergue, where, you know, we were all tired and fed up, and it was just nice being with someone, and, you know, you just appreciate the support and just the physical presence of other people. I think you can summarise that as fellowship. The next defining part of being a pilgrim on the Camino, I think, is vulnerability. You know, your friends and family are hundreds or thousands of miles away. You could twist your ankle at any moment. You could forget some vital piece of equipment like your phone or your credential. You know, it's very difficult for one pilgrim to help another, so you are quite vulnerable. That means you appreciate your fellow pilgrims when you do see them. And the local Spanish people who meet you are super helpful. You know, when I was about 30 years ago, I spent a short time working in Madrid, and I remember it being very difficult to cross the road, even at a pedestrian crossing. You know, you had to wait for a gap in the traffic and you had to sort of walk across quite quickly. When you're wearing a rucksack on the Camino, as soon as you stand by a pedestrian crossing, the traffic stops instantly. On one occasion, I was stood at the side of the road, not wanting to cross and not near a pedestrian crossing, but the traffic just stopped, so I had to cross then, whether I liked it or not. And now and again you get lost, and the locals enthusiastically direct you back to where you want to go. One old local Spanish man told me what a great thing it was to walk the Camino and how he really encouraged me to do it and all this sort of stuff. So just being vulnerable, people want to help you. And last but not least is the physical walking. It keeps you physically busy all day, it keeps you mentally busy, and I find day after day, week after week, you forget your old life, and in fact you stop thinking about your old life. So that night I stayed in an albergue in Itero de Vega. It was quite nice, quite spacious. I had a separate bathroom, two separate bathrooms, rather than a communal bathroom with separate shower cubicles. A separate bathroom, you could lock yourself away in the privacy with the hot water. Oh, it was lovely. So that night there was a man in the dormitory who was coughing all night. He had quite a loud cough. He didn't sound very well at all, kept us all awake. He's going to be an important part of the story in part 4, so that will be in part 4. So that's the second week. Back to where we started off. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So this to me sums up the pilgrimage. All human beings are free to walk your own Camino. They're equal in dignity and rights. So it's all about being together and being treated equally when you go to a church. If you believe in God or not, does not matter. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is together. They are endowed with reason and conscience. So each person is free to choose boots or shoes, how far they walk. Do they walk by themselves or with other people? And they all act towards each other in the spirit of brotherhood. So there you are. The answer to pilgrimage.